In the year of our Lord 2026, we're currently living in what I like to call a Kaiju renaissance. We had a Godzilla movie winning an Oscar, a critically acclaimed Ultraman movie on Netflix, and a massive cinematic universe with King Kong and Godzilla at the helm that has raked in an ungodly amount of money at the box office while dominating streaming services like Apple TV Plus and HBO Max. However, there is a big name that's missing from this new era of giant monster movies: Gamera. There have been rumors aplenty that we'll get a new Gamera movie soon, with some of these claims going as far back as 2015, with this CGI short film that was randomly dropped on YouTube. However, 10 years after the fact, and all we got was Gamera Rebirth and some DLC in the video game Gigabash. Actually, that's not true. We did just get this picture of a Gamera statue being used to promote the theatrical release of Shin Godzilla. There was a time when people considered Gamera to be a direct competitor to Godzilla, mostly in the 90s with the Shusuke Kaneko trilogy. However, outside of the movie theater, we did get one new piece of Gamera media, and that's a Netflix TV show called Gamera Rebirth. It seems like this show just sort of came and went, though. There's this weird crowdfunding campaign floating around the internet vying for a second season, but I'd be wary of that, as I haven't really heard of any major IP, especially Gamera, crowdfunding for a new season of a Netflix show. I mean, if that is the case, how exactly did we get to the point of using a GoFundMe to make season 2 of your TV show? What happened? Why is Gamera so irrelevant nowadays, and does he have any hope of regaining the prestige he once had in the 90s? Well, looking at the long history of the franchise, Gamera never had the industrial support that kept Godzilla alive. Daiei was already collapsing in the late 60s, budgets kept shrinking, and the series leaned on stock footage until the studio finally went bankrupt in 1971. A brief revival under Takuma produced the incredible Heisei trilogy, but that success came from a short window of creative freedom as opposed to a stable, long-term financial plan. After another ownership shuffle, Kadokawa tried a kid-friendly reboot in 2006 that landed with a thud, and the franchise slipped into limbo again. It's that long pattern of unstable ownership that explains exactly why Gamera disappeared for almost 20 years. It's pretty much been 20 years if you look just at theatrical releases. And honestly, it's why something like Gamera Rebirth just feels more sudden and experimental as opposed to a clear direction for the franchise and the character. I feel like no one really talked much about this series beyond its DLC for Gigabash that came out 2 years after the show's release. I mean, when you look the show up on YouTube, you're gonna get some, assorted fight scene clips, and that's about it. There's maybe a couple in-depth videos, but in-depth as much as my video, where it's gonna be like maybe 10 to 14 minutes, nothing crazy. There's just not a lot of love for this show on really any social media site. So I have to wonder, is Gamera Rebirth any good? Is it terrible? Is it the savior of the Gamera franchise? Well, without wasting any more time, let's get right into it. In 1989, 3 kids in Tokyo get caught in a sudden kaiju attack and end up seeing Gamera protect the city. Strange groups swoop in claiming to be studying these monsters, but the kids uncover a private organization that's trying to control kaiju and treat children as expendable assets in the process. Each new monster attack pushes Gamera closer to collapse, including battles with updated versions of classic foes. By the finale, a lunar base activates a final creature meant to wipe out cities. Gamera destroys the threat and the organization behind it, but appears to die in the process. The surviving friends return home believing the Guardian is gone, until a small new Gamera hatches, teasing a future return. When I first fired up this series on Netflix, it started playing just the last episode, which kind of threw me off. I thought that was episode 1. I was getting really into it, especially when they introduced Gaios. And then we see this really gruesome moment where a character gets mauled by a little Gaios. And then it just cuts to episode 6. And I just turned off the show and I didn't watch it for 2 months straight. So if you're wondering why this video took so long to make, that's why. Getting to the actual show itself, I feel really mixed on the animation, which if you're an outsider looking in, it's the very first thing that you're going to notice. Looking at the positives first, I absolutely adore the monster battle sequences. It's so cool. Hell, even the horror-driven sequences look phenomenal. Like in episode 1 where a bunch of Gaios hatchlings cut some humans into bits with their lasers. It's gruesome, Basically, anytime there's a bunch of action happening, it looks amazing, and I just am beside myself as to how cool this show really looks. Throughout this retrospective series, I've talked a lot about how the majority of Gamera plotlines from the Showa era and their characters and their monsters feel very underutilized by the medium that they're in, by the budgets that they have. There are countless examples of the 60s Gamera movies having really interesting and unique concepts that are wasted in execution. Monsters like Giron or Virus have super interesting power sets, but were limited showcasing them in their initial appearances. Gamera Rebirth takes advantage of the animated presentation. As a result, you get the best action scenes in the entire franchise's history. Some of the designs are kind of weak though, like I don't like how some of the monsters are just straight up one singular color with a little bit of a secondary color accenting it. Like, I don't know, it's just not my thing. It's very generic, and a lot of the detail gets kind of muddled as a result. I think if some monsters looked a little bit more detailed, it would have been far more visually interesting. Still, Gamera looks really cool, and while it isn't the best design, I just love how big and bulky he is. He looks like a tank with legs. However, when it's not an action sequence and it's just human characters interacting with each other, the show looks insanely cheap. Maybe that's just me not vibing with the animation style in those moments, but I'm not a fan. It's just far too jittery for my liking, and it's inconsistent in that style because at times it'll look really choppy, but then it'll get really smooth seemingly at random. It also doesn't help that I'm not a big fan of this 3D anime style. I really didn't like it with the Godzilla anime trilogy, and here it's even worse. I understand that that part comes down to preference, but for me, I'm just not a fan. A lot of it can just come off as feeling really weightless and uncanny. And the weightlessness really works with the fight scenes, and I love that general aesthetic here of these monsters are flipping around in the air, and even though they're giant, they still are like almost human-sized in a way. But because they're in a small city, it just works. I think despite my usual leaning towards slower monster battles, it works here because it's animated, and your brain kind of disassociates a lot of the necessary slow movement for giant monsters in live-action cinema, because here it just doesn't really register as being real, so you don't need to sell any illusion of scale and size. Still, that doesn't mean that this show doesn't have moments where scale is shown off. Gamera's first on-screen appearance is perfect. I just love that wide angle shot from street level as it pans up from the human characters to Gamera. It's awesome. The shoddy human animation is at least alleviated by the human characters being rather enjoyable at times. I remember not liking this as much when I first watched it, and had the general impression that these were just mediocre human storylines that kind of exist to pad the runtime, but I kind of like this a lot. And I think it works for the most part, except for the protagonist's mom having an Oliver Tree haircut. I also gotta compliment the music because it really works. Beyond the Gamera theme from the 60s, where a bunch of kids sing about how much they love Gamera, Gamera doesn't have a theme like the one Godzilla has. While Gamera Rebirth doesn't exactly give him a theme like that, it still does a damn good job of making the fights feel incredible. It's very, very, very reminiscent of the score from Pacific Rim, and I mean that in the best way possible. I love that soundtrack. I do not mind having distorted guitar in your Kaiju soundtrack. It works. A massive issue that I do have with the show is its tone. There are definitely times where it works really well, and I enjoy this kind of Stand By Me mixed with sci-fi horror vibe. It's just off-putting when the kids swear every now and then, and it gets to be a bit too much, to the point where it's almost like South Park in some scenes. I get it, kids swear. That's just something that they do, and that is the English dub. I haven't seen this with the Japanese one. I wanted to watch this with the dub. Leave me alone. I just feel like it seems almost forced, like the creators decided to just have their characters swear for the sake of it. I'm not saying that this needs to be a kid's show, because there are definitely some very dark moments littered throughout. But the show constantly changes its tone at breakneck pace, where you'll get a really heartwarming moment, and then one human character calls another human character a fucking pig, and then you'll get a horror sequence where a monster maims a human, and then rinse and repeat. It's very jarring at points. It sort of feels like the show is just throwing everything at you all at once, and I just wish that they tried to establish a more concise tone throughout, instead of just slapping it together like they did. Again, there are some really interesting moments here, but I would have liked it if they would have taken it in more of a coming-of-age direction, where Maybe the kids are way more innocent at the start, and then gradually we can have them becoming a bit more hardened and a bit more aggressive towards each other, and then you can kind of move away from that, I don't want to say wholesome because that's like a Reddit word, but that wholesome stand by me, like, oh, it's a bunch of kids going on this adventure together, and then you go Stand By Me and you introduce a bunch of dark shit. Like, that's maybe what they should have done from the start. Instead, we just get hit with all this stuff all at once at the beginning, and it's like you should have maybe built this up a bit more and established one singular tone and then introduce the horror stuff to kind of go, yeah, this world has a lot more going for it than just little kids dicking around in the woods. I get this as a TV-14 show. I'm not saying that I wanted this to be a kid's show. Not at all. Animation can really be anything. I love adult animation. I have no issue with that. My point, though, is just I wish this was more consistent. That's my only gripe with the tone. It's honestly a shame because, like I said, the action sequences are awesome. It's really cool seeing these monsters in a Gamera project again. It's just neat seeing this franchise be revived or rebirthed, pun intended. However, the script is just so undercooked. Yes, the human plotline has a lot of interesting concepts going for it, but it just collapses. The script is the most important part of any story. It's the foundation, and if the foundation is weak, then the entire thing will fall apart. This, unfortunately, falls apart for me as a direct result. They had all their ducks in a row, and then, I don't know, the ducks flew away. I'm kind of like done with analogies, but whatever, we're moving on. I can tell that a lot of love was put into the show by its creators, and I don't want to sound harsh, but at the same time, I don't think any of this was worth my time. I know that sounds like really cruel to say, but I would just rather watch the fight scenes on YouTube and just call it a day. Am I saying the show is just basically aura and hype moments? Yeah, pretty much. There's a lot here that could really work. I just wish that someone would have stepped in and done multiple drafts and revisions for this during the writing process so that it wouldn't be such a jumbled mess. At this rate, it's the most recent Gamera project, and from my understanding and the public's understanding, there's not much really in the works right now. That Kickstarter for Season 2 went absolutely nowhere, and it generally seems like this could be the end of the Gamera franchise. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely hope to be proven wrong, and I would really love to see more Gamera stuff being made. But it just seems like Kadokawa really doesn't care or have the funds to make more Gamera content, despite the demand from fans. A lot of people have been calling for Gamera to join the Monsterverse, and personally, I'm indifferent to that. And if anything, it feels kind of demeaning to the character to suggest that the only way he can succeed and be relevant is if he shows up in an American cinematic universe. To be honest, I think the only way that Gamera could truly succeed in the modern day would be if Kadokawa sold the rights off to some company that actually wants to do something with the character instead of just sitting on the IP and doing nothing with it. I really hope and pray that we'll see that day come, but it just seems unlikely. I hope that if there's anything that you get out of this, it's that Gamera is a really cool monster who deserves better. He deserves more attention and more love in general. He's more than just a Godzilla ripoff or a potential candidate for crossing over with King Kong in a Hollywood blockbuster. He's the friend of all children, a guardian of the universe, and an underappreciated titan of Japanese cinema. And with all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media. This wraps up my Gamera retrospective series. I have now covered all the movies and TV shows in the franchise. This project took way too long to make. I was hoping to have it completely finished by October, with the supercut coming out in November 2025. And that very obviously did not happen for a plethora of reasons that I will not get into here. I just want to give a big thank you to our channel members. For $1.99 a month, you could have seen this video and other select videos early before the public. Current channel members' names are listed right up here on screen. I couldn't do what I do without your help. So, thank you, sincerely. And if you're not a channel member, still, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Peace out.